warfare in Missouri has long ended, but the historiographical warfare continues. What are the historians fighting about? We'll find out when we return on Civil War Talk Radio.
My husband and I met at a
strip mall
dance. It was a beautiful old
strip mall.
I had seen my husband before at a big rally at the
highway on-ramp
for all the men who had enlisted. He was going to war. 4 years later, we married at the little
convenience store
downtown.
When we lose a historic place, we lose a part of who we are. To learn how you can help protect places in your community, visit nationaltrust.org. History is in our hands. A message brought to you by the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the Ad Council.
Hey y'all, this is Stephen Cochran. As a country artist, I have traveled around this great country of ours, often meeting our brave men and women in uniform. And as a Marine and veteran of both the Iraq and Afghan conflict, I know how important it is to thank our troops who defend our freedom each and every day. One of the best ways to thank them is to give their children and spouses the gift of education. Scholarships for 2 years, 4 years, and vocational school. This is exactly what a national charity, Thanks USA, does. Please go to their website, www.thanksusa.org, to make a generous donation to the Thanks USA Scholarship Fund for the families of the troops, and I thank you.
You're listening to World Talk Radio, where the world comes to talk.
Welcome back to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopovich, talking today about the renowned Missouri bushwhacker Samuel S. Hildebrand. I've been reading his autobiography as edited by Kirby Ross, who has produced a new edition, thoroughly annotated, that helps us distinguish the tall tales and exaggerations of Sam Hildebrand from the actual bloody deeds that he committed. And it reveals a side of warfare that it just has really no redeeming value at all that I could discern. Hildebrand is by his own account, a bloodthirsty bushwhacker who kills people he disagrees with, people he has a beef with, people he has a personal grudge against, attributing to them a Union sentiment in most cases, and he also kills Union soldiers he doesn't personally know because they're on the Union side. But it's not an ideological war, it's not a economic war, it's a clan war, it's a war to kill people who have hurt your family or hurt you in the past in some way. I guess there's some economic element. Hildebrand frequently talks about getting supplies from stores where they would just go into someone's country store and take everything they needed, rob the proprietor.
Right. One store, in fact, I think he robbed them 3 times in 9 months. But yes, they would when they would make their raids into southeast Missouri, they would make sure generally that they when they came back to Greene County, Arkansas, to their base there, that they had a lot of plunder, a lot of supplies with them.
And which they obtained the 5-finger discount. They did not actually. And stole whatever they needed. That's how they got things. Now, something that struck me right at the very beginning of your book, in the acknowledgments, is when you were talking about how the fact that southeastern Missouri has been neglected, southeastern Missouri, compared to the well-known Quantrill and Anderson activities in western Missouri. You point out that since mainstream historians haven't written much about this, there has arisen in the vacuum what you describe as a dysfunctional system of historiography.
The area.
Tell me about that.
Well, the area has been referred to as being a scholarly black hole. There was a time period during the 80s and 90s that there was a lot of ideological-based material coming out, good versus evil kind of stuff. When it would cite something, you'd go to that source, and it either didn't exist, never could be found, or didn't say what it said it said. There's been some excellent stuff coming out in more recent years. I think that was a dark period in
Well, let me probe that a little bit. You say good versus evil. You mean some of the writers are claiming either that Hildebrand was a good guy or a bad guy?
Well, not just Hildebrand, but the war in general was fought. It was a good versus evil fight. Somebody would do something on one side, and the other person would do it on the same thing on the other side. And for what one would do is would be represented as being wrong, and if somebody else on the other side did it, then it was justifiable.
So burning a farm, for example, it's okay to burn the other guy's farms, but it's not okay when they burn yours. Is this
the historians would represent it that way, depending what side. Historians, the writers would represent it that way, being the same action taken by one side was wrong, but the same action taken by the side they favored was right. There was a lot. I mean, Southeast Missouri was a very, very brutal place. If you didn't serve, if you tried to remain neutral, they would come and they would either you would either join up with them or they would shoot you. And both sides did that. The Federals, a lot of Southeast Missouri was no man's land. The Federals nominally controlled it, but being a guerrilla warfare, a lot of it wasn't really controlled at all. And a lot of Southern sympathizers that were in Southeast Missouri were taken out and murdered, and a lot of Union sympathizers were taken out and murdered. There were a lot of people that just disappeared. So it was brutality was enacted by both sides. There was no single side that had that did it all. It was, like I say, it was a very brutal place. There was no holds barred, and being so remote, there just was no recourse to be had regarding your complaints. If they come and murder your family, then a lot of them would take up their rifles and, like Hildebrand did, and go after the other side, and that happened on both sides.
So, and I guess we see that in Hildebrand's writing himself, where he criticizes the actions of federal troops who burn homesteads or shoot prisoners, describe these as horrible atrocities. But he does exactly the same thing.
Well, in fact, he criticizes it, and he says that he never did it, but then in his book, in a couple of different places, he talked about how he burned the building here, burned the building there,
right?
Burned the home. So he says at the beginning that he never did it, but ironically he did.
Now the historiographical conflict of the 80s obviously didn't descend to these brutal levels, but I gather these are not professional historians writing that you're talking about. These are...
Well, there were some self-published books that came out. Nothing by any mainstream publisher. Is mostly self-published. All I can say is anybody researching Southeast Missouri should exercise caution when they're reading something. If it's not sourced, they take a moment and think, why is this not sourced? And if it is sourced, in fact, I refer to this in the foreword of my book, use the old Ronald Reagan maxim, trust but verify. So if it is sourced, go to the source and see if it's there, see if it exists, and if it does exist, make sure it says what it's being represented as saying.
Well, that's certainly good advice in any historical reading, but usually we don't face quite the same challenge where there's a whole body of work by people who have an ideological axe to grind and
well, in fact, this had a paralyzing effect on the whole research in the area for a while. You couldn't write anything. In fact, when I first started researching the area, I had one individual who I respect very much said, when you write about this stuff, you're going to have to deal with the other stuff that's out there. And so I've tried to do that in a low-key way, but in a persistent way. It has to be dealt with because sometimes the material is finding itself into the mainstream, and you ask the individuals why they used it, and because when you go to the sources that are the primary sources, it's just not there. So anyway, it's but in this vacuum, I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store here. It's wide open here. There's a lot to be written about it. It's a very compelling story, what happened in southeast Missouri. We know what happened in virtually every other part of Missouri, southeast Missouri. It's just there's nothing there that has been really written about. There have been a few things, like I say, I'm not entirely critical of what's going on there. In recent years, there's been some extremely good stuff that's been coming out of southeast Missouri. And
well, it's interesting. There are many areas of the Civil War that draw their share of cranks and extremists. Certainly, I found writing about Lincoln, there are people with extreme views on Lincoln or Jeff Davis, which reminds me to recognize quickly one of our listeners sent me an email about a Jeff Davis impersonator or portrayer who was arrested recently for stealing Davis documents. Not the same person I mentioned on the show a month or two ago, who I saw performing in Virginia, but it does seem something about the Jeff Davis portrayal that draws out the wacky in some people. But obviously here it's beyond wacky. We see real hostility in what some of these people have written or how they respond to others. Let me go another direction briefly. The dust jacket of the book mentions that Hildebrand was a bushwhacker and says, like Quantrill or Nathan Bedford Forrest or John Singleton Mosby. Forrest and Mosby, of course, are not bushwhackers, but regular soldiers or partisan soldiers. But I'm guessing you probably did not write your own dust jacket. Is that accurate?
The dust jacket wasn't. I had nothing to do with that.
A lot of readers don't realize that authors don't write their own dust jackets.
I think they were focusing more on the guerrilla nature of their activities. No, they were regular soldiers and technically not guerrillas, the individuals you mentioned. Hildebrand was a guerrilla. He was a bushwhacker. He was a self-admitted bushwhacker. He called himself that. He said it matter-of-factly, said that that's what I am, then that's what I am. So,
and it's very different. I mean, if you read anyone who's read Brian Steele Will's book on Forrest or anyone's work on Mosby, you realize these guys fought as leaders of organized military forces, and Hildebrand might be a captain or might be a major or he might not be anything. His commission is somewhat unclear.
He claimed to have received a major's commission, but the person he claimed that he received it from wrote their own memoir, and he was far away from where Hildebrand said he was when he gave it to him. So I guess you can make your own decision on whether he was commissioned or not. But Hildebrand operated with just a handful of men, maybe a dozen men at most. He only operated with organized troops once, and that was during Price's raid. He was a guide at the beginning of Price's raid during the opening leg of Price's raid. So that's the only time he ever operated with regular troops, regular Confederates.
Yeah, that stands out in the book. The one time when he's engaged in what looked like regular military operations with Sterling Price, 1864, he still.
As soon as he got home, back to his home county in Missouri, then he spun off again and went back to settling scores. And while Price went off, marched across Missouri for another month or a month and a half, and so Hildebrand was with him for just a couple of weeks at most.
So it's safe to say he is far from a regular soldier, and he wouldn't call himself one.
I don't think so, no.
Well, it really is quite a interesting book. The chapters are very short, a couple of pages each. There's 40 or so of them. They go by. After a while, the murders start to blur together, but it's hard not to turn the page and see what this guy is going to do next.
He gets pretty graphic at times, and in some of the material I found to accompany his text, some of that's pretty graphic too on what he did to some of these individuals. Yes, it's kind of, it gets pretty bloody sometimes.
It does, and we'll spare the details, but
sure.
Let our readers, let our listeners go ahead and look for this. It's University of Arkansas Press is the publisher of this book called The Autobiography of Samuel S. Hildebrand.
Yes, you can find it at any bookstore, online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere, and it is University of Arkansas Press.
So the book is out there. Are you working on anything else Civil War related these days?
Oh, I got a lot on my plate right now, Jerry. It's several plates full. I wish I had more time to go into it. I'm working on a regimental of the 3rd Missouri State Militia Cavalry. I don't know if you read my story in North and South magazine. It has to do with that. And actually, I'm working with IMG Productions, a homegrown outfit out of Wichita that's recently did work on Iron Man, Transformers, Spider-Man, and we have some things in development, hopefully for the big screen and the small screen.
Well, that sounds very intriguing. I hope those work out. Thank you very much for being with us on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me, Jerry.
And listeners, thank you for listening to Civil War Talk Radio.